Hi, everyone. I'll try and keep it short and succinct. Um, you already had a lot of data. I actually was trying to see how much more data I could gather. I spent a month trying to find that after and having spoken to Sajida and even before. And interestingly, there's a lot of research done in Kerala, but at the same time, if I'm looking at teacher proficiency, teacher levels, and a distributed analysis of what rural urban situations can be, I find very little. There is a lot of SCRT studies and reports that you can access, and also private, but those are very limited in terms of analyzing in one diet or one area. It's not a whole country, a whole state perspective. And that is very interesting. Yes. So I am not going to give you too many statistics. I'm going to start with three areas in terms of problematizing and primarily trying to ask you to deliberate and think. And there's a lot of study and research to be done more, as Suraj pointed out, in terms of even the analysis. Even if you looked at the last slide, which I think a lot of us were most mesmerized by, I think, of his presentation, of the choice of the language, it would also then go on to ask what will be the difference between rural and urban areas, which again, if you're trying to find out, there is not much that you can find other than anecdotal references. So my focus is on teachers in this particular space. And I ask certain questions in terms of course, the language policy. And we focused a lot on Malayalam, but I think Sajida's presentation also highlighted how we need to think beyond Malayalam in many classrooms in the Kerala context, because there are students increasingly from Bihar, from Hindi-speaking belts. They may be Marathi speakers, and we have in Kerala quite robust presence of Maharashtra laborers, for instance. And what does that do in terms of a language proficiency, where largely teachers seem to be more proficient in Malayalam? How will they handle these multilingual classrooms? What are preschool teacher service trainings really dealing with? What is a pre-service teacher training dealing with in terms of these kinds of contexts? And when you look at the curriculum, it is largely centered around understanding Malayalam as the base, but not the elements of what other languages can do and how we can handle these situations. And that's across primary and secondary. In fact, sometimes in secondary, you have the burden of primary students not being trained adequately and therefore having to do more translanguaging in that classroom space. But does translanguaging lead to any kind of only Malayalam? Is it focused only on Malayalam English, or is it also using other languages? These are questions that you would have. Does the teacher have to be that proficient? That's a question. How will these teacher proficiencies be developed? Are they to be proficient in the language or the methods that are to be used? Is it to be that the teacher is a facilitator? How is the teacher's facilitation coming to be? And so what are the current strategies that are there in terms of the pre-service teacher development and also in-service training that comes in? Some highlights from a study that we had done at TIS, Padma was the lead author, was the studies prove that in government schools, there are more old teachers and younger talent seems to be attracted towards private schools. And this is not necessarily for Kerala, this is an India study, but it seems to be that there is this mode towards age as a factor. While I don't want to get into ageism issues, but the fact is that if we talk about the new generation, and Kerala is known to be one of the few states which has a high proficiency and high, incidence of teenagers using social media apps, accessing devices. How do teachers become proficient in being able to adapt to those elements? How does the school, largely, definitely in Kerala, as pointed out, infrastructure is not as much an issue. And AI models are being tried out here much before the rest of the country. But even in that case, in rural areas, during COVID, we did find that there are socioeconomic disparities. There is an issue of inclusion even within the state that does work on these elements. So these are some of the questions that I really am focusing on. I'm probing it and throwing it as questions rather than as solutions or suggestions. I don't want to call it ineffective language teaching, but I'm just highlighting that as a phrase in terms of how we need to work on this. It's great to see a state that does actually well on matrices as per the country, really work on trying to say how we need to improve. We had a delegation from Finland at one point, and they were saying, we want to understand multilingualism. And I was like, multilingualism in Finland? And then realized that there are quite a few Indians who are there, and even if there's one child or two children in that school, not even in the class, who are speaking two different languages. In this case, it was Bengali and Marathi, and they wanted to know how they could, ensure that the child has multilingualism and has their language cultural background coming in. We have a larger incidence here. And so those are kinds of questions that we will require. And it's no longer dual language needs that are the case. It is the fact that multilingual classrooms will have more than 5-6 languages in many a case, and especially in rural areas where that might become more problematic because they are limited in their exposure to their own native language in the surrounding areas, and they have very little input in their school classroom environment as well. I want to really try and talk about the fact that there is this cultural identity emphasis that NEP also identifies with not just the Malayalam language, but all native languages. And then there is the global communication focus. The studies done so far are really focused on communicative competence. I'm not going to get into more of this because we really have started, that was the whole day that we were discussing all these elements. Professor Veeramani also pointed out these issues that deal with what marks and assessments deal with. But where is cultural literacy coming into our classrooms? Where is critical literacy coming into the classroom? How is the language classroom equipped to deal with creative literacy, for instance? Are questions that are to be probed. And how is the teacher equipped to both assess and focus on? So I'm going to deal not with particular study statistics because, as I said, some of these studies are very limited. But I'm going to quote one study. This is done by George Verghese, and this is basically talking about, again, a sampling that has been done in particular areas and diets with schools. But the teachers consistently have reported, and that is about 60+% of teachers reporting outdated teaching methods, looking at exam-centric focus, which was what Professor Veeramani had also said, and the lack of contextual learning, where they are talking about the fact that there is not a real-world connect that they are able to manufacture, they are able to find for the student, and they are limiting themselves to the textbook world, which is surprising because the curriculum is actually getting revised consistently in Kerala, and it has a discourse-oriented pedagogy. The curriculum design is discourse-oriented pedagogy. So when teachers report, and in study after study, by the way, even SCRT has a relish study that is also done and an SLAP study that is done. And both of these also there seems to be reporting of the fact that teachers are using traditional methods, whereas the curriculum itself is focused on discourse-based oriented pedagogy. And each time that you go ahead and look at some anecdotal reference from there, the idea seems to be that they are focused on exam and marks. And Therefore, perhaps what Professor Veeramani said is that we need to work first on marks before we work on assessment, before we work on others. The element that comes through in some of these areas when we talk about how do we use literature to teach, what is the curriculum, context learning, teachers seem to be proficient. There's high, what you call, teachers are qualified, they are trained, they know it, but whether their own proficiency in the language is adequate, there is not enough study on. In fact, most statements seem to imply that teachers themselves prefer Malayalam to teach English rather than otherwise. Again, study classroom, these are classroom observations based on small studies where there is these, classrooms being combined, Malayalam and English classrooms being combined, teachers using a lot of Malayalam to teach English, using local references, local contexts, and even local references to actors and films to be able to use and teach English as content rather than as a language to be learned. And so how does this bilingual pedagogy, multilingual pedagogy really work? And do we still need to call it bilingual? Should we not now focus more on multilingual? Because in the recent revisions, you find that there is more terms being used in documents that talk of bilingual pedagogy, but maybe that should change to multilingual. So I'm problematizing some of these. I want to highlight very quickly, because I will run out of time, the fact that increasingly we have a generation of learners who are very accustomed to devices, their own smartphones and cell phones, etc. We are still working in a world where we are creating materials for this kind of a shared screen space. I want to know how many of you, there are very young people in this room, how many of you actually will want to watch on the same shared screen space. I find my students listening and consuming YouTube videos. One is at 1x speed, one is at 1.2 speed, one is at 1.5 speed, and a lot of people in the audience nodding their heads and smiling as I say this. And they don't want to consume it in the same way. Subtitles are switched on, off, replays are on. And if you notice now, in very many children, you go to hotels and restaurants and find children, they're all addicted to their cell phone and they want the access in their hand. They want to play it at their speed and they want to switch and fast forward, and they know how to do it. And 2-year-olds know when to go on to the next. So while Peppa Pig may be very, famous amongst them, they don't all like to watch the same thing. So if you have ever done child minding for a group of 5 2-year-olds, they need 5 devices, even though they are all watching Peppa Pig. It's very interesting because they're all watching it differently. They all like different things. And how do we then, in this case, build for a shared classroom space? What are the kinds of strategies with AI coming in? If we don't prepare our teachers in terms of the traditional methods that are there in terms of the AI support, if we don't understand the responsible AI use, and we consistently and uncritically are looking at AI to be just used without any support, we are kind of digging a grave for ourselves and the future of our children. And so when we look at it, yes, AI and technology can be utilized for real world tasks. But we need to understand, and teachers need to be very critically trained to be able to understand when to use AI, what to use it for, and how to guide their students for it. Now, the other question that I have, therefore, is, do teachers have to be themselves proficient in all the tools in order to be able to deal with these kinds of changes that are coming in? What is the kind of proficiency build-up that we need to inculcate in the pre-service and in-service teaching models? Should we teach them skill-based training where we teach them a tool, Mentimeter? We had in COVID times, we had 1,500 sessions on how to use Mentimeter and Kahoot and specific tools. Is it that? Or is it that we train them with kinds of competencies to understand when and what tools to use and how to build their skill sets for these tools, how to realize these responsible use for these tools? These are questions, especially since the NEP says that teachers can bring in their local context knowledge into the classrooms. How are we equipping them for that? And my time is up. I'll just take 2 minutes more. So what kind of formative assessments are there? That's leading on to what Dr. Veeramani had said. And there's this wonderful, we have been talking about assessments forever and ever. And it's really interesting as to how we consistently work on some of these elements. And in 1964, there is this Up the Down Staircase book by Bell Kaufman, who's an English language teacher. And even before that, Gijubai Badeka, in terms of studies, talked about assessment in 1932. But it's consistent that we constantly have best marks go to teachers and memorizers, cheaters. Marks depend on memorizing and not on real-world knowledge. And in fact, in the study that was done by both Verghese and a study that is also by Anupama, teachers seem to be talking about the fact that assessments are focused on reading skills, on memorizing, on grammar, and if they can, there are these very focused, non-communicative tasks that they can get away with. And there are these formatted answers that they should learn in order to be able to score marks. And therefore, that's what they're focusing on. So can we change and bring about more rubrics that will allow for those marks that you talked about? And can we have much more robust knowledge? Thanks to Parak, etc., we should be trying to see how we can bring in some of these other performative tasks into the exam system and not just focus on the written and the read text format. So how can we change the curriculum and methodology to enable listening tasks, for instance, to be done in the classroom? We find that there is one small study done across a sample of just about 30 teachers that talked about the fact that the teachers' own listening skills were poor when they're doing something that's equivalent to an IELTS task. Again, as I said, many of these studies are really very small sample size, so I'm not even quoting all of them, though I have them on the slide. But these are kinds of things that we need to focus on if we want to bring in more language teaching elements. Therefore, teachers' own professional development needs to be focused upon. And there is very scarce, and I want to highlight the last part, but there's very scarce proficiency statistics of teachers. Proficiency need not, this is a question that I'm posing, do teachers need to be proficient in English, highly proficient in English, to be teaching in English? Or do we have to get them to be engaging in facilitation? This is a question that I'm throwing out to you all. And how do we then focus on these teacher gaps? But there is a large data elements in terms of the private and public that's already been focused upon. But there's also about economics and affordability that we should be thinking about as we go ahead, because urban students, and this is again another study, but urban students seem to be performing better in English language proficiency, primarily maybe because they have exposure through social media and other apps. And then we need to focus and think about some of these elements for the rural and the underprivileged who may not have the same exposure. Thank you.